Well, hello everyone and welcome to The Weird Man. This is the second episode of Series 2. The Weird Man is an exploration of the access of leadership for everyone. So far I have proposed that the first step in access to leadership as a human being is the recognition that we are part of a bigger reality than the part we perceive either with direct or scientific or intuitive or psychic approaches. In episode 1 of Series 2, I outlined 3 integral characteristics for a life in leadership, namely virtue, spirituality, and generation. I am suggesting that these things are not the only underpinnings of a psychology or strategy of leadership, but these are the attributes that are realized in an enhancement of our brain networks that create an interface and engagement with our larger reality. In other words, the development of virtues, spirituality, and a generative capacity lives in our larger reality and communicates in the larger reality. Through this living and communicating in the larger reality, all time and space is laid out like a board game that a player can move across with a glance or a single motion. This possibility of seeing it all in one glance is not the current capacity of the human being. However, imagine that you have developed this capacity and so that this is indeed the world of leadership you are working within. And so you could work as if it were so. Here, in the leadership as virtues, spirituality, and generative futures, responses appear in the time-space matrix as if by magic. Yet, it's only as working in that larger reality that affects seemingly unconnected process by force that all connections in this time-space matrix are possible when accessed in the larger reality, like a single glance across a board game. In this episode, I'll begin to look at the language of virtue, spirituality, and generation as supporting the domain of leadership, particularly you as a leader. So the first definition, virtues, are the human characteristic that move our relationships with other humans and our ecology towards intimacy and extended consciousness. It exists in action. It exists in service and contribution. An attitude in of itself is not a virtue. The second definition is spirituality. This is the effort required in the application of a virtue. It is the function of action in service or contribution of others and the ecology, and the effort required due to the existing capacity of the person. Simplistically, the greater the effort, the greater the spirituality. In any example, a number of effective virtues may be brought into play. For example, authenticity, vulnerability, kindness, courage, caring. The application of a range of virtues will tend to increase the effort required to bring them to bear on the action. Now, neither the effort nor the capacity can be determined by external measurement, and certainly not by the subjective view of anybody. Thirdly, the capacity for generation. This is the occurrence of a created thing, novel approaches for social and ecological advancement by opening up new spaces or clearings of human activity by the application of virtues and spiritual design. The language integrating virtue, spirituality, and generation is a structure of language requiring the opening with an authentic response and a follow-up with a generative possibility. For the purposes of this discussion, here is another definition. Leadership is the realization of a future that wasn't going to happen anyhow, which future fulfills or contributes to fulfilling the concerns of the relevant party. Being a leader, therefore, is the clearing in which we live as leader, that brings the strategy to bear, invites it like a gravitational attraction into the space. Not that the following tools or strategies that we're going to talk about can be utilized before such clearing of being is generated. Authenticity, an aspect of virtue, is a much obscured idea. Here I will use authenticity as referring to expressing how we are truly feeling and believing about the circumstances in the conversation. An authentic response also requires that our perspective of the circumstances are also described. Authenticity not only refers to expressing emotion, but recognizing that the perspective of the circumstances, which has been termed by others as how it occurs to you, that is specific to you and not necessarily to anyone else in the conversation. You will come to see that once you are being a leader in the spirit of virtue, spirituality, and the generation of futures, a certain structure of language will tend to automatically show up that has you declaring how the circumstances are for you authentically and in conversation. And it goes on to generating a future that would transform the circumstance, including your and others' relationship into the future and the context you hold for that circumstance. You can try this. Explore how your language transforms as you are being virtue, spirituality, and the generation of futures. Are there some cases that you are recently involved that you could apply this language of Lov-SG in conversation? As you try it out, keep a diary of your authenticity and virtue, spirituality, and the generation of futures, along with the response from the world and others. There is nothing to be fixed here, nothing you should be doing. Just do what you are doing and look at how it was from the point of view of virtue, spirituality, and generation. Allowing you, there's a practice here you don't know how to perform, and that you're just going to try it again in every human reaction. And as you keep trying and seeing how it was, you will gradually see that a whole new world opens up for you. It can feel a bit clunky. Remember that when a baby is trying to walk, it doesn't have a master strategy. It just sees from walkers that there is getting up on two legs and walking. It doesn't occur to the baby to stop trying, and sooner or later the baby stands up and takes a few steps and then a few more, and finally it's a toddler walking everywhere, and then by 3 years it's running a little bit, and 4 years jumping, and 5 years hopping, and by 7 years running like for the rest of its life. Like any practice and learning in a domain of life, the first lessons are setting up foundation practices. Eventually, the layering of lessons and practice and experience with leadership will lead to mastery. Leaders need to become intimately acquainted with emotion. At any moment, we are living with an emotion, a mood, even more than one. We have an innate emotional temperament, noticeable in early childhood. As we grew up, most of us sculptured from that a small range of specific emotional responses for the circumstances of life. Often these are also an emotional mix. Our identities become associated with these fixed emotional responses, and our friends and acquaintances come to know us by them. There's Bob. He's grumpy again still. We can develop skills to bring to bear the whole range of emotional expressions and utilize them in various degrees and mixes to the efficacy of communication in leadership. Leadership emotions are not one thing. So in future episodes, we'll look at the dynamic conversation, staying with Lov-SG, Lov-SG, and utilizing embodied emotional expression. All of this from the perspective that the conversation is really happening in the larger reality. Expect the unexpected. Expect the magic, the miracle. Bye for now.